Um, my name is Jennifer Dye. I'm a librarian at the Detroit Public Library. I want to thank you for joining us this evening. We've been presenting this program in partnership with the Detroit League of Women Voters since September of 2020. We present on issues of concern to Michigan voters about 10 months of the year. We do stress that both the library and the league do not advocate for candidates or causes in forums like this. We're trying to provide information that should be useful to voters. You were brought into this program muted, and we ask that you put any questions into the chat. Ruth Coolwin will capture these questions and ask them at the end of the presentation. We might be able to allow people to unmute at the end to ask questions directly if time allows. We are recording this presentation and it will be made available on DPL's and the Detroit League's websites. Roberta, were you planning to speak about the league? Oh, Deborah.
Either is
Sorry.
it's okay. I can speak on behalf of the league. My name is Deborah Bunkley. I'm the communications coordinator for the Detroit Hamtramck Highland Park League of Women Voters, and welcoming everyone. This is a different topic, and there is a lot going on today. The League of Women Voters is a local, state, and federal organization, nonpartisan, non-profit organization, and we welcome new members, men and women. The league, remember, democracy is not a spectator sport, and the league works to preserve, protect, and promote voting rights and civic engagement. Um, I always like to mention Vote 401. We're getting closer to the midterm elections. And I also like to mention that we have a speakers bureau that's speaking on behalf of know what you sign when signing a ballot proposal petition. And I just this next Wednesday at the Hamtramck Public Library, Rhonda will be speaking from 2 until 3. And I will say thank you for allowing me to represent the league. And with no further ado, I pass it along.
Thank you. Our presentation tonight is by Edward Lynch, AICP. He is the Director of Research with the Center for Equity, Engagement, and Research at Detroit Future City, which is also known as DFC. In this role, he leads research projects for the center, and including reports such as the state of economic equity in Detroit, growing Detroit's African American middle class, and 139 square miles. Edward?
Yep, thank you. Glad to be here. Thanks for inviting us. We're happy to come out and talk, particularly on the topic of the middle class. And so that's a topic we've been quite interested in a little while, or for a little while. And then a few years ago, we had the report Making the Middle Class, which we released, kind of came out. And then earlier this year, kind of coming into the election, we released a kind of set of priorities for making the middle class and growing the middle class in Detroit for the kind of the next mayoral administration. And kind of the presentation here tonight kind of combines those two, talks about some of the things we can do or we think we can do to grow the middle class, but also kind of brings in a lot of the data from the Making the Middle Class report that we like to highlight. And so Detroit Future City, we're a nonprofit organization here in the city of Detroit. And we're kind of focused on two kind of big picture things in here. One is kind of growing the number of thriving, resilient neighborhoods that can attract, retain residents of diverse incomes and backgrounds, and then disrupting systemic racism, poverty, and other inequities to grow household wealth and income for Black and other Detroiters of color. And so we've been around as an organization for a little over 10 years now. as our own nonprofit. Before that, we kind of started out of the what was originally the Detroit Works planning process back in 2010, 11, 12, and that led to the strategic Detroit Future City strategic framework plan. And then we were kind of an initiative, had a winding trajectory as like an initiative of city government through the Detroit Economic Growth Corporation, and then eventually kind of becoming our own nonprofit 10 years ago. And so kind of as we kind of moved along, kind of through that, one of the things that we've been kind of pretty consistent on kind of going all the way back is kind of the middle class and kind of building a middle class Detroit. So this picked up, we did kind of our first big, one of our first big reports, this 139 square miles report back in 2017. And when we kind of looked at that and we kind of looking at all the conditions and kind of what was going on from a data perspective in the city of Detroit. And so we kind of looked at that. At that point in time, 75,000 or there was kind of looked at that. About 75% of the city of Detroit was making $50,000 or less. And so kind of so this kind of that lack of income coming into the city is kind of a real problem. And so, but it was also kind of well out of line with the region as well. So things have kind of changed a little bit over time. Inflation happens, but we now have about 60% of Detroiters that are making less than 60K. And so one of the things and kind of why we to kind of take on kind of the middle class is we want to put forth the vision of kind of where we want to be as a city. We could easily stay focused on eradicating poverty, but if you only kind of focus on that, where would people go once they kind of move out? And we've seen kind of this outward flow of people from the city. So we want to kind of take that on from a different kind of angle and creating a middle class city where everyone can be welcome and kind of be inclusive. And so I want to start out with a kind of a definition of what, when we talk about the middle class, what do we actually mean when we're talking about the middle class? And so as we kind of define the middle class, we do that kind of based on income. There's a lot of definitions out there of this. And so this is one of those, if you ask 5 people, you'll get 6 different answers for what the middle class is. But we define this around really being kind of between 80% of the national median income and 200% of the national median income. So it's kind of a big range in there. But when we set out to kind of actually kind of figure out this, a lot of things that kind of come with what people perceive as like a middle class lifestyle, priced nationally on the national level. And once we kind of get up into this kind of range, there's a certain level of stability that comes across with that. And so earlier in the year, we kind of put out this brief, kind of a short report looking at kind of what the kind of the next mayoral administration, or now that we know the Sheffield administration, could consider taking on to help build a middle class in a middle class city within Detroit. And kind of the first part, one is that kind of understanding that this is what we want to be. This is the city, the kind of city that we want to be. Means that when we think about being a middle-class city, that's a city that can grow household income and wealth through good-paying jobs, can attract middle-class households, and retain middle-class households in the city as incomes rise. Attracting and retaining the middle class is critically important. You think about the fiscal health of the city. We're in a good fiscal position right now, but we want to continue to kind of grow that and grow the tax base of the city. As we, the kind of next third principle, decision-making should be data and community informed. Decision-making policy development should inform by kind of what's out there, and kind of what the data, or kind of lean on data to kind of inform those, but also work with the experience of residents and how people are experiencing the city as well. And finally, the city and kind of the city government must kind of work in close partnership with others. This is one thing that we understand is that Detroit can't do this alone. There's a lot of kind of things out there. Shifts in the federal government is also like working with philanthropic, nonprofit, community-based groups, and kind of others, kind of leverage kind of the range of groups out there and kind of different entities out there to move things forward. So those kind of principles, we'll kind of walk through some of the data that we had in the Making the Middle Class report and kind of take a look at how the city has been evolving, particularly in kind of over the past decade or so, maybe 15 years, 10, 15 years, kind of looking back and how population is changing, growing, and some of the things that are kind of happening at the neighborhood level. And then we'll kind of go through and talk about some of the policies we think could be undertaken in there. Something we all know, but in the past couple of years, there's been a substantial decline in population since it peaked at a little over 1.8 million in 1950. But over the past couple of years, this has actually started to turn around, and that's kind of the work or kind of the results of some kind of concentrated work over the past decade to kind of stabilize neighborhoods and kind of get that moving in the right direction. So we've seen population growth in the last couple of years. The first time in 6 years, but there's still 67,000 fewer people in the city than there was a decade ago. So I kind of showed this up after a really kind of traumatic time in the first decade of this century. Neighborhoods have started to stabilize and kind of started to grow. If I was giving this presentation 10 years ago, we would have been talking about almost universal decline across the city. But we're now seeing places, far west side, Livernois and 6 Mile, the University District, Bagley, Grandmont, Rosedale, East English Village on the east side, that have kind of started to turn around. Of course, downtown, Midtown, New Center, Corktown, Woodbridge, kind of a growing list of neighborhoods that have kind of turned around and are starting to have stabilized or starting to grow again, and kind of building a momentum out across the city. But kind of the biggest decline in there has been in the Black or African American population. But we've seen some gain kind of to offset a little bit in white and Hispanic and Latino residents as well. And so when we also think about like the middle class and we kind of, as we define that, there's about 66,000 middle class households in the city of Detroit. It's a slight decline from what it was a decade ago, but really we've kind of been hanging around about a quarter of the households in the city kind of fall into this 80% to 200% of national median income definition. And that's been reasonably consistent over the past kind of 10 years, maybe a little bit of decline in the share. But when you compare that to the region, I think this is where we kind of have like an opportunity to grow the middle class. So it would take about 32,000 households, new middle class households, to be kind of the same share of middle class households as the metro region as a whole. And so I kind of talked about this a little bit earlier, but as we kind of move this forward, the two kind of critical things to I think to understand is one, Detroit can't see itself as this is something it has to take on entirely itself. There's a lot of help that kind of Detroit needs. Both state and federal policy kind of limit or help what Detroit can do. So working with the state and federal government, understanding that the The environment around that has changed dramatically since we kind of first put this out. And that could have substantial effects on the city of Detroit. But working with the state government, a lot of enabling legislation. Kind of one example that we kind of gave was if we want to change like the tax code and the way we tax property, that's going to need some state enabling legislation to happen as well. And finally, fully committing to being a middle class city, understanding that there's a lot kind of going on and a lot that brings up a lot of challenges for people in there, and sometimes competing priorities. And so, what I like to highlight, like building wealth, particularly through like the appreciation of housing values in there, that kind of runs headlong into affordability and challenges. Being an open and welcoming city, while we value the people who've lived here for a very, very long time, right? And so these are things that we're going to have to kind of work through as we kind of move towards that vision of a middle class city. And so I'm going to kind of walk through a few more kind of data points and kind of like how those kind of feed into some policy priorities for middle class neighborhoods and building middle class neighborhoods in the city of Detroit. One, I think improving incomes is going to be important. Suburban or incomes for suburban residents remain substantially higher than for Detroit rivers. On average, it's about the average income on the region is about $50,000 higher than it is in the city of Detroit. And this holds out for across all racial and ethnic groups, where you see people in the suburbs doing substantially better than people living in the city. I think we also need to grow the number of middle-class neighborhoods. These have declined, kind of lost a few over the past decade or so. But we also have kind of gained, and there's places where kind of the middle-class neighborhoods are growing. If you look Jefferson Chalmers, downtown, Midtown, places like that. But we also see neighborhoods like such on the west side, Park side, which is the neighborhood just on the other side of Rouge Park. It's this very small kind of neighborhood. It's I believe the picture that looks very similar to the picture I had of the cover. Just a nice urban neighborhood, but it's as kind of that's one that's stabilized by a lot of metrics and looks very nice, but kind of slipping away out of kind of the middle class status as well. So when you kind of talk about what is middle class and kind of what are the indicators, one of the major one is people's views of home ownership. And for a city of its size, Detroit has always had a fairly high rate of home ownership, particularly among the Black population. It's been kind of one of the places where you do see or kind of always seen a lot of Black home ownership. That kind of slipped away a little bit following the Great Recession and the mortgage foreclosure crisis of the early part of this century. But it's kind of started to come back a little bit. And so city is now majority homeowner. But that, I think, only tells part of the story with that. We're really a city that's not necessarily majority homeowner or majority renter. At this point, we're really both. And these two things kind of come together and are intertwined with each other, particularly at the neighborhood level. Almost every neighborhood in the city has substantial amounts of rental housing within it. Some places you think, multi-family buildings along corridors, but in a lot of cases, that rental housing is single family, and just over half of the rental housing in the city is single family housing. And a third of the city's single family housing is rental. And so as these kind of markets kind of come together, stabilizing both the homeowner and renter market is critically important for moving neighborhoods forward, and kind of building those middle class neighborhoods. And also a key, I think, to home ownership, and I think one of the most important indicators for neighborhoods and how the health of neighborhoods, how they're doing, and how people feel about their neighborhoods is the amount of mortgages that we get. So this is most people who buy a house to live in it get a loan to do that. These are very expensive things to buy. And so the 30-year mortgage is in there. And what that is at its core is it's a 30-year bet on for the homeowner, the neighborhood that they're living in, that's going to be a desirable place for the long term. And so that's why it's such a really good indicator of that. And so during the kind of Great Recession, the mortgage market in the city completely dried up. We're down to about 200 loans in the city back in 2012. Since then, there's been a steady increase in mortgage lending, about 4,300 back in 2024. We don't have 2025 data yet, but so as soon as we get that, we'll be at that, hopefully have a lot more to talk about mortgages in the future. And kind of as this and kind of as mortgage lending in the city has increased, there's kind of always been this question of who's getting these mortgages. And we go back to 2017, 2015, there was about an equal split between black home buyers and white home buyers, but right around 500 or so for each. Since then, the amount of loans going to white home buyers has kind of leveled off. It's really black home buyers in the city kind of leading this comeback and increase in the mortgage market as well. So what does that look like from like a neighborhood perspective and where they kind of are? Just a very few places back. So this is back in 2012, where we had about 200 mortgages in the city, concentrated in a very few places: Grandmount, Rosedale, Livernois 6, Bagley, University District, Palmer Woods, Green Acres, East English Village, Indian Village, on the east side, as well as a few in Jefferson, Chalmers, downtown and midtown. But as kind of time has gone on, this is kind of built out. Whoops, wrong way. From these neighborhoods, and as you can see, 2017 we're doing a little better. There are about 1,200 mortgages at this point. Almost 1,300 mortgages in 2017. By 2022, still kind of growing strong in places like Grandmount, Rosedale, Bagley, University District, on kind of that northwest side as well. Up to about 3,200 and kind of spreading across this across the city back in 2024, almost over 4,000 as well. So kind of building out one step or kind of one neighborhood at a time, and kind of gradually growing. I think there's still a lot of room for improvement here. It's still a lot of neighborhood stabilization that can happen to kind of continue to get continued increase in the amount of mortgages in the city. On the rental side, one of the things that we've seen for a while is really since the pandemic and kind of year over year, kind of just an increase in the rent that's going for units. A lot of costs have been kind of going up for landlords. You see that kind of reflected in here. Very few or kind of a declining number of units for less than $1,000 a month, and kind of gradually kind of increasing. So there's a big jump in 2021, 2022, and then kind of continuing to go up from there. But when we actually think about housing affordability and the affordability challenges that many people in the city of Detroit have, and it's a very real challenge for a lot of people. So we look at cost burden. So this is people spending more than 30% of their income on housing, and then for severely cost burden, that's spending more than half of your income on housing. So when we and kind of why kind of that middle class and getting that income in is so important. In places around the country, the cost of housing is actually the driver. That is here in the city of Detroit. It's the income of the residents that's really driving this. Only 15% of households with an income over $50,000 are cost burden. 7% for those over 75,000. So when you start to get into that middle class income band, the cost burden almost completely disappears. But when you're not, right, and you're coming people who are below that, almost 85% of households with an income less of $50,000 are cost burden. So it's a very acute problem that really in Detroit, unlike a lot of places around the country, is driven by income. Then a couple kind of big things that have always come up when we talk about Detroit and kind of building this neighborhood is vacancy. For all the Detroiters, this is something we know, right? You see it every day, but it's something that's kind of gotten better over the past 10 years or so. In 2014, there were about 140,000 vacant housing units. Today, there's 37,000 fewer than there were a decade ago. About 31,000 demolitions within the city of Detroit. And so that's kind of something that you can kind of feel as you travel around the city, that it's something that has gotten better over time. And when we look at like beyond kind of the abandonment that's out there, a lot of particularly the units for sale or for rent within there, the vacancy rate for those has kind of dropped kind of dramatically. We're seeing more units being renovated, and substantially fewer abandoned units than we have seen in the past. Still a lot of work to do, and as you kind of travel around the city, that's something that we know. But there's been very real improvements here over the past decade as well. Schools is also a substantial issue, particularly and something that we think we need to improve is we want to attract middle-class families and families to the city. And so we looked at this, the schools that were performing above the average for the state. And there's only, it was back in 2022, there's only about 14 of these places like Chrysler Elementary, Bates Academy, Renaissance, and Cass Tech High School, Edmonton, and a few others. Also need to, as we think about kind of improving educational outcomes in the city as well. And then one thing that we've made that's plagued Detroit for decades, but that we've also have seen big improvements over the past couple of years, public safety. This is things we've been in the paper lately, fewest murders in decades, all sorts of violent crimes are down, carjacking is down 45%, non-fatal shootings down 26%. This is all great efforts that have been made to improve these that are kind of really starting to kind of pay off. But we still have a long way to go. And so beyond the kind of the crime, which is something that people talk about a lot, we kind of like to expand the definition here and talk about things when it comes to like pedestrian safety or non-motorized safety. And so Detroit doesn't rank fairly well on that. And so I think there's a lot of improvements we can make there to improve safety for the kind of the more vulnerable road users as well. So what are some of the policy priorities and things that we talk about and that we believe can help improve the middle class in Detroit? One, the first thing is investing in building middle class neighborhoods. So what do you mean by that? And so as we've kind of seen with the mortgages, continue to invest in areas adjacent to the middle class neighborhoods to kind of build that momentum. Continue to do this by continuing to create neighborhood amenities, attracting businesses, investing in quality public spaces, and increasing public safety in those, and developing incentives and kind of capital incentives to expand the investments in those. We know we have to improve housing diversity, housing quality, and the stability of housing in the neighborhoods. So we think we can do this by increasing investments in home repair, energy efficiency, long-term housing preservation programs, evaluating and streamlining the development process to make it easier to do the things we want in the city. And then I think we're starting to work with the landlords in the who own our rental stock to make sure that everything's up to code and is we have a quality rental housing supply. So we think we can do this through the strengthening enforcement of the rental ordinance. But as we do that, right, that's the stick. We need the carrot as well to kind of support and work with landlords to provide resources to be able to do that. We need to improve education and provide high quality educational opportunities to attract and retain families with children. I think working with the Detroit Public Schools Communities District, charter schools, to support efforts to improve educational outcomes in there. From the city side, investing in services and partnerships to provide wraparound supports for students to make sure that Detroit's children have everything they need to be able to succeed in there. So things like transportation, being able to get kids to school, and so on, like that. We also increasing affordable homeownership opportunities within the city. We have a very affordable housing stock, but policies and programs to increase that, things like down payment assistance, to kind of and home buyer education programs to promote long-term financial stability, be able to kind of help people achieve this kind of marker of middle class lifestyle. I think on the neighborhood safety side, continuing invest in community partnerships. There's been a lot of investment in this over the past few years. It appears to be really paying off, right? I think we could also do road design and traffic enforcement to help improve safety for the non-motorized and pedestrians out there. And I think finally, kind of this is big. We've had a lot of programs over the last few years funded by the Inflation Reduction Act and the ARPA, the American Rescue Plan Act, coming out of the pandemic, some of these pandemic programs. That's funding is starting to dry up and be spent down. And so look at identifying what programs have been working, what's doing well, and working to identify new funding sources for those programs. We also have kind of a set of policy priorities for building wealth within the community and kind of wealth generation for Detroiters. I always want to come back to this kind of income piece, because this is where actually like a lot of people's wealth is actually generated, right? And so it's your ability to use the income that you create to purchase housing, to save for retirement, put away savings for to kind of insulate from some of the shocks. And so being able, maybe a little more short-term acute events, and being able to kind of build that is critically important, not for just growing the middle class, but stability across the city. One of the things that's kind of hampering that, we know, is there's a growing divide by education in the city. So we're seeing kind of the young white population kind of in the city that's fairly well educated relatively, while the Black Latino population kind of has kind of peaked and kind of stayed relatively stagnant over the past 10 years. So we're really looking to want to kind of improve those educational outcomes, right? And so why is this important? And so we did a report a few years ago looking at the fastest growing, well-paying occupations in the region. And let me take a look at that. It's a big long list of those. But one of the things that kind of look at is though people with a bachelor's degree or higher are more likely to be employed in these occupations, to have better employment outcomes, more employment stability. As you kind of go that excuse me. Some people are substantially more likely to have kind of these job opportunities. So we know that we have a substantial population that doesn't have a four-year degree. And so one of the things that we're kind of reporting is what we call like middle wage jobs. These are jobs that pay more than a median wage and do not require a college degree. And so these have been kind of slipping in the share within the city of Detroit, kind of growing substantially in the region, and kind of working to attract kind of more of this particular type of jobs. It's also kind of as we kind of dug into these a few years ago, one of the things that you do see is it's even though it's not necessarily these don't necessarily require a college degree. You typically see some or need some sort of credential to be able to obtain kind of this, or training beyond a high school education to kind of work up into these better high-paying jobs. We know that when we talk about wealth, one of the main ways that people do that is through their home and kind of owning their home. We looked at sort of issues around heirs properties or tangled titles. So when an heirs property is a family-owned property inherited through generations passed down, with kind of the formal legal proceedings or a will in this process. And so without that, there may be multiple people that have a claim on that. And so these are more likely to kind of be lost for a number of reasons, but kind of working to both identify these and kind of rectify a lot of these issues. About five that we were able to identify about 5,500 of these particular properties with this kind of tangle title issues. That's worth about $260 million in value for these houses. And so most of these are owner occupied. So this is a great deal of wealth within the city that's tied up and could potentially be lost if you kind of work through some of these title issues. And so how do we, and kind of what are the policy priorities that we think for wealth generation within the city of Detroit, and how to do that? So attracting and growing jobs and industries that pay middle class wages. So this is targeted investments in funding measures to grow these occupations, right? We can focus attraction efforts on industries that have a high share of Black workers and growth occupations, align educational pathways in college to meet the demand of these growing industries. Of course, improving educational outcomes is key to growing them. But one of the cornerstones of growing the middle class, continue to invest in enrollment and completion of career and CTE, provide training and educational supports for workers who want to move into these kind of growing occupations, increasing access to middle wage jobs. I think a lot of it's about identifying pathways and kind of working towards those. And so, maybe start out with one job, but how you kind of like work through how that leads to, or how one job kind of leads to another. You're able to kind of work your way up. I think increasing awareness and kind of understanding what these are is also critical, particularly as like students move their way through their career journey, educational, and then onto a career path. to kind of understand kind of what's out there and how how to do that as well. I think increasing capital and support for small businesses as well, and coordinate direct capital to kind of grow businesses throughout the city as well. And then working to collaboratively to kind of help some of these heirs properties issues and kind of work through some additional legislation on that as well. And kind of the last big section that we have is build kind of climate resilient infrastructure. Policy partners building climate resilient infrastructure in the city. This come in a lot of different ways as well. And so it's something we've kind of cared about Detroit Future City for a very, very long time. And the kind of the big picture here, right, is we have about 18 square miles of vacant land within the city. And so the majority of the city's vacant land is residential. And so that creates an additional challenge because it's not 18 square miles of vacant land like you might see out kind of on the urban fringe where you could just have kind of a large developments on that. These are small tenth of an acre parcels that combine 92% of them of these lots when you combine them all the contiguous ones together are less than an acre as well. So it makes them fairly hard to redevelop in the current conditions. We have seen kind of some work towards this and kind of building what we would call kind of this open space network, kind of reusing land in the city in different ways. And so one of the things that get solar, we've seen solar developments. This is O'Shea Park on the city's west side, just near 96th and Telegraph, a substantial solar development in there. We also, the city has kind of rolled out 5 solar neighborhoods, about 167 acres of solar, looking to further their goal of powering city buildings by with clean energy by 2034. We also need to know that, or we need to make considerable efforts in the infrastructure and the kind of electric infrastructure in the city. Michigan ranks near the bottom in power reliability, both in the number of power outages as well as actually being able to turn those power out or turn the power back on when it goes out. So it's a substantial challenge, that kind of really starts to hold back the city as we try to move forward, particularly doing development in there where there's also substantial costs for utility hookups as well. So we have it's not just the electric infrastructure that we need to continue to make investments in, but this is the cover of the report. And why it's not just any neighborhood street on the side. And through there's some green infrastructure that kind of captures rainwater as it runs off, works to prevent flooding. So we need to continue to renew the infrastructure, our water and sewer infrastructure to kind of prevent flooding. We've had some massive flood events. Basement backups have been a substantial problem for a lot of people around the city as well. And so we've also seen a lot of streetscape improvements. And so around the city, and you can, as you kind of travel around, certainly notice these, not just bike lanes, but also kind of bus infrastructure in there as well. This is probably not the best picture of it, but of these, but it captures kind of all of that in one. And beyond providing, that safe bus stop for people to get on the bus, the bike lane for people riding their bikes. This also works to kind of slow everybody down a little bit and provide a little bit of traffic calming to make use some design solutions to make the roadways safer for everybody. And so what are these, we talked a little bit about some of the stuff there. What are these policy priorities that we think here? Again, we have 18 square miles of vacant land, kind of leverage that to create open space amenities for the city of Detroit. We evaluate areas or identify and evaluate cities where, or areas in the city where we could do medium and large scale open space by right. So thinking about that in the zoning code, develop clear and understandable policies for disposition of publicly owned land to be used as open space. Continue to invest in the parks and greenways, substantial investments in parks and greenways over the past decade. We need to kind of continue those to build off those as well. And then increase in the tree canopy to be able to use that as a critical piece of infrastructure as well, both for improve air quality, but mitigate stormwater. We continue to invest in infrastructure to prevent flooding. This is both, pipes in the ground that can prevent kind of stormwater, but also green infrastructure and incorporating that in neighborhood developments, street design, green projects to help keep water out of the sewer system in the first place, and then support infrastructure improvements that helps kind of new development get off the ground and be able to kind of mitigate some of the costs there. To talk power outages and work at the state level to change policies to allow for the adoption of community solar in neighborhoods to give people better options. And then working with DTE to continue to upgrade the power grid within the city to kind of make it more reliable and better, work better for the residents of the city as well. And finally, investing in those mobility options for residents, improve transit systems around the city of Detroit so that people can get around more quickly in an efficient manner, and investing in streetscapes to help promote neighborhood walkability as well. And so that's the kind of what we are, kind of the topics that we think that will help move Detroit forward and kind of build that middle class city that we all would like to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Edward. Ruth, were there questions?
I think people may be still digesting some of it. I have a few questions of my own, maybe that you can answer while you are.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's always one of those things. One of those things you want to say. It's a lot.
Yeah, Ashley is able to join us. Ashley, I don't know if you want to unmute yourself and
Yes.
say hello quickly.
Hi, everyone. I am Ashley Williams-Clark. I am Vice President and Director of the Center for Equity Engagement and Research at Detroit Future City. So I have the honor of working alongside Edward. So it's wonderful to be with you all tonight. And apologies for being here a little bit behind. I'm in Alabama right now on a little bit of a civil rights pilgrimage. So nice to see you all.
Cool.
Ruth, before I forget it, the library has partnered with a group to help people dealing with the heirs property situation. I do not have the details here, but if anyone wants information on how to deal with property that has been inherited but not legally recognized, just send me an email. I just put my email address in here. I will be happy to share that. Now, Ruth.
That was an issue that I hadn't previously been aware of. So yeah, thanks. It's nice to know. I'm wondering, Edward and Ashley, if there's a place that we could go. So if there's something in here that you're presenting, that you're talking about, some of these priorities that we really care about and we want to advocate for, is there a place that we can go and look at, like, some of the policies we can advocate, like in this new administration with the new mayor, that we could say specifically, I want you to do something like this to help make more middle income like jobs, or middle wage jobs. Is there a place at your like website or something like that where we could look for some of those not just sort of policy ideas, but like actual implementing plans that we could say, I want you to do X. Is that a clear question?
I think so. In the guide that we put together for the mayoral brief around growing middle class neighborhoods, they're kind of at the level that Edward just presented on, right? Of areas that we need to focus on. In our work, we don't get as specific to this is the very specific policy to hone in on for all of those things. I think across our research, there are places where we mention, like for the heiress property work, for example, unique opportunities to advocate or get involved. But I think what'll be really interesting too is with the mayor's transition team and a lot of our research is infused through that to see some of the policies that they come up with. And I think from that, it'll give us a lot better idea of what might be some areas where advocacy could be helpful or being able to kind of encourage and push.
How about like are there resources where we can learn about how other cities have tackled some of these issues? It seems like one of the major issues, and I guess I'm wondering, like, kind of chicken and the egg style. Like a lot of these things would require money, but we need to sort of grow the middle class to get the tax base to get the money. How do you kind of like get out of? Are there other examples of other cities that are doing similar things that can be looked at that can give us some ideas on those things?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of just some examples around there. I would look like if you were to look, I would look to there's a idea. It's called like middle neighborhoods, and it's what is the name? What is the group that runs the
NCST, the National
Community Stabilization
Trust.
Trust runs. It's called the yeah, I get lost in the acronyms, but they have this idea of middle neighborhoods, which is fairly similar to what we're talking about. It's not like a one-to-one in that they have frequent webinars on a bunch of different issues facing middle neighborhoods. And so that's a really good, that'd be like a really good place to start to kind of see like neighborhood examples from around the country.
And you're right, Ruth. The idea that a lot of this requires it is like the chicken and egg, and it's very multifaceted in terms of all the angles where you need to be addressing it. And so I think for all the cities, when you look at the middle neighborhoods work, like there's examples of things that Baltimore is doing or Cleveland, like other cities that are maybe addressing the homeownership aspect, or they're working on actively marketing their city to middle class or Black middle class families, or they are working on really strong kind of career connected education pathways. And so I think through all of these, there's different things different cities are doing. And one of the things that we try to do in a lot of our research as we dive into some of these topics, and I think Edward might have talked about this, like through our work around economic equity, when we looked at all of these different factors that influence economic equity from jobs, income, education, neighborhoods, health, entrepreneurship. Part of what we try to do through our work is dive deeper into some of those topics, and where possible, lift up case studies of other cities. So they're also woven throughout some of our reports where we'll talk about things other cities are doing. But the Middle Neighborhoods resource that Edward lifted up is a great spot to see nationally what some cities are doing to support middle neighborhoods.
Yeah, and I think the other thing, in the position we're at right now, here at the start of 2026, there's a lot of momentum on this, like going throughout the city. So there's a place to start, and something to build off of as you kind of go. So basically, just about all the key issues in here have the ball rolling. It might be rolling slowly, right? And it might not be rolling everywhere, but it's rolling. And so there's a lot of things to build off of.
Yeah. And to tie into your question, Ruth, about like specific policies that are worth looking into, I think, and I'm sure all of you have, as you look at this report and you hear kind of the focus areas, there's specific spots where it might be like this resonates with you. Like, I'm really interested in housing, I'm really interested in education. And there are also really good partners that work in each of those spaces that might have specific policy agendas tied to them. For example, I know like CDAD, for example, around community development is putting out some strategies that are very much more so like policy, very specific down to the language things. And so I think, with a topic this big, it can sometimes feel like, well, where do you even start? How do you approach this? But I think what's great about this is that there are those specific areas where you can get more particular. And with that, from the case studies or the policy work, there are areas and research that from complementary organizations that exists to dive deeper into. Just got to pick somewhere to start.
Thank you. Yeah, I think trying something is better than not trying something, right? Yeah, thank you. That's a very thorough, great answer to that question. The Oh, I was curious. This is just kind of a weird statistical number. You said that there were like 37,000 fewer abandoned homes, but there were, it wasn't written down, but I think you said there were 31,000 demolitions. So that means there's only like 6,000 homes that were saved. Is that what I'm hearing? Truly?
It's a mixing up of a couple data sets. So I wouldn't. I think there's probably many more than that. It's housing units. I think there's also a lot going on in that kind of whole thing. So where there's some it's some new construction, some old. There's also just like a natural like amount of vacancy, but really it's kind of pulling together like a couple different data sets in there as well. I think there's probably been a decent chunk that have actually been reoccupied, but I think unfortunately there's also probably been a decent chunk that became vacant that weren't before.
And then this maybe will be another thing that is not something specifically that you know about or that you all look into because it's a little bit more specific on the policy itself. But I was curious, you mentioned like home ownership, like grants or things like that. And I remember, I feel like I had because Wayne State offered for a little while money to faculty and folks to buy houses in the area, Midtown. And I remember some folks saying that it just made all the prices go up by the amount that they were offering. Like they just sort of prices of homes just went up because everyone knew that there was that amount of money left. And I'm curious, do those grants really work without a policy to prevent that, or is that something that you can comment on?
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit. So this is I think Live Midtown, and there was a corresponding program, Live Downtown. There was also later a program, I think through Midtown Inc. Stay Midtown, right, for kind of existing residents as well. And so that program, I think, worked exactly as designed. And so the design at that time when that came out, I feel like this is 2011, 12, somewhere in that range. The housing market was really soft, right? And there wasn't a lot of demand for particular housing in the city. At that point, I was renting an apartment in Woodbridge, which is in that area, for like $450, which is a nice apartment in a reasonably nice neighborhood. That's not a lot of money. And actually, that being kind of so low actually causes a lot of problems. It means you can't add supply. It means it becomes difficult for landlords to maintain it at that. So actually, like inducing the demand in there is actually kind of what started to kick off the revitalization of kind of really get it going. It had been going for a little while before that, but like really get it going. And it's done pretty well in there. And so, whether or not you think this is one of those, I kind of talked a little bit earlier about the challenges and competing priorities in there, right? And so whether or not you think that this is a good thing is up to you, right? And there's cases to be made for, I think, both. You could make a strong case, I think, for both sides of that story. But it's a program that, by what it was setting out to do, was rather successful, and it attracted people to downtown and midtown when in a time when we weren't really doing that, and that kind of really started getting the ball rolling in that. So.
And I think to, your other piece you lifted up, Ruth, about how can you prevent that from happening? I think the reality is that these housing programs and, mortgage tools all have to operate within an open market. So it's in a program like that, you can't control what the market is going to do necessarily, and which is why I think when you look at housing policies, housing programs, like, you need to reevaluate, you need to respond to what the market is doing. And then, obviously where there are opportunities, put protections in place for folks, but that is one of the challenges, right? Markets can change, and it's just basics of market dynamics when you introduce something like that. But one of the things that I know Edward talked about is that over the last decade, we are seeing areas of the city now that didn't have any market demand in terms of mortgage originations, where we see activity now. We're seeing, that return of a mortgage market, and there needed to be things to help spark that happening, not just in Midtown, but across the city. There have been programs like that have provided down payment assistance or have tried innovative ways to support borrowers in getting access to mortgage products, just to help kind of spark demand, or not demand, but to spark like mortgage activity in areas.
Yeah, I have. I'm done with questions. So Cheryl, and it looks like also Deborah has maybe something to share.
Well, I guess the question I would ask is, in part, is related to seniors, for one. I mean, there are a lot of populations. We haven't talked about really disability particularly, and and that is a real concern too, is how is the city addressing and dealing with it? But what with older adults, how are you planning or involving them or understanding their needs as for a continuing life in Detroit? I mean, have you discussed or looked at that area very much? I know there's much to look at, so I can understand it. It's going to take a long time, and especially with our government that we have now. But beyond that, how many seniors are there? People, let's say, that are at least probably 60 years old, because that might be for many of them retirement age. I mean, whatever the age that, not just 65 maybe, but do you know how many seniors there are or would be considered seniors?
I'm going to stall while Edward, as I can tell, looking that number up.
Still look it up, yeah. I don't know.
But
I don't know the number off the top of my head.
But to your point, Cheryl, this is stalling, but also I think what you are lifting up is incredibly important, because when we look at Detroit's housing, the majority of it is single family housing that is not necessarily designed with accessibility in mind. Detroit Disability Power does a great job of talking about some of the challenges around our housing stock, and how a lot of these conversations around like home repair also are tied up with conversations around not just accessibility for folks who are living with disabilities, but also for the aging of our population, right? Accessibility from having where bedrooms are, stairs, et cetera, entryways. And so I would say, are a great resource to look at. And if they haven't presented to your group, They have. Okay, as I say, they are
Good
amazing
times,
with
I
their.
think.
Okay, I
It is
believe they
good
have a
times.
report focused on home repair specifically as well. Um,
The
but it is
presentations they've done were more about voting access.
okay. Well, they have a great resource too
Yes.
around home repair and trying to link that into the conversation of both with the aging population as well as for folks being able to live and stay in Detroit, regardless of your accessibility. That it's a really important piece of it. It's something I'd love to see more of, Cheryl, and dive more into
Okay.
about the aging in place component, and especially as we look at kind of multi-generational communities and the value that that brings by having multi-generational neighborhoods. Um, Edward, did you find the number?
Yeah, it's about 15% of the population. Um, yeah, and
Wow.
I think one of the other kind of things too, beyond everything that Ashley said, a lot of the stuff that we talk about and a lot of the things makes life better for everybody in the city, whether it's children, just regular working age people or seniors. Increasing mobility options does that, making it a safer place works for everybody. So those investments in parks and kind of public spaces really are investments, not in any one specific group, but in in everybody, and really makes I think the city a attractive place from our oldest residents to our youngest residents.
Right. Thank you.
Deborah, you had something to share
No,
about
it was mentioned, answered, and I'm good.
One of the biggest problems, I think, having worked with seniors before at Hannon Foundation and gone into houses on other occasions of seniors, let alone my own, but is the need for housing repair. If I could say anything in Detroit for housing, it would be for anyone, not just seniors, but people need housing repairs. It's just pathetic. I'd like to start something for front porches. I don't think anyone can get into their house, not anyone, but it's hard to get into
Yeah.
some people's houses. Um, up their front porch because it's crumbling. Our housing is so old in Detroit. And so if that doesn't become one of the city's major focuses, I will be vastly disappointed because I think it just is. I mean, we won't have housing left if we don't
Yeah.
get something done, and we have an administration that's not supporting and helping us. So we have got to, and I don't mean our local, but our local administration really needs to help us as you are helping us to guide some efforts around that. So
Yeah.
that's if I were giving you any information.
Yes. Well,
Yep.
and have you guys had Heather Z from the city come present to you?
Heather,
Edward, do
What?
you remember the name of the task force? It's like a home repair task force that the city's
Oh,
been leading,
Yeah.
and they've been working with enterprise community partners and others to try to kind of innovate in the home repair space.
what
So
are they called again, please?
Oh, I'm gonna get Heather Z is what she goes by, and
the
um,
Home Repair Task Force.
I think it's a home repair task force. I
The
can
home
find the
repair, it's home
information.
repair
Mhm.
fund through. There's a home repair fund through
Fun.
Enterprise
yep.
There you
that
go.
Evie Evelyn's Wybuck works
Yeah.
deeply on, and
And
so
she worked with Heather Z, I think,
yeah,
on building that out.
yeah. It's like home repair is something the city's cared about for a
They
very
have
very
several
long
grant
time.
programs
There's
that
also
Yep.
yep,
But they're
run
not
particularly
out
for
run out
enough.
every now and
They
then.
are
But
not
yeah.
enough.
Yeah, no,
Mhm.
absolutely not. It's the problem with home repair in the city is that
It,
there's a big need.
yep.
Every time they open a program, it runs out of money because
Well,
it's a fairly
I know.
expensive
Yeah.
proposition as well. It's 50, 75. It's getting even more expensive.
And
So
needing
like
like a good
construction materials,
contractor pipeline too.
yep.
mhm.
yeah, construction materials are one of the things that have really kind of like kicked
Yeah,
up
that too, yeah.
in the post-pandemic.
And getting someone to do it as well.
Yep,
If you can afford it, it's all of the above.
yep.
So you're
Now,
right, Cheryl. Like it is a need, and especially for seniors across
Yeah.
the city as a whole, it is a need, and there needs to be a lot of resources directed towards it, or that it requires a lot of resources to fix at the level that
Right.
is needed in the city.
good questions. Deborah has mentioned that the Detroit League has a meeting on Zoom on Saturday from 10 to noon, but I don't have the link, so I can't post it. Cheryl, do you or Deborah or Roberta have it? Have the
I
link to
think
the meeting?
I know, but I mean, I do have it, but it would probably take me and my technology skills too
Yeah.
long. But
And I don't have it.
I did put in the chat how to contact us. You could either
Mhm.
call us because you can get the link. I'm not sure that it was mentioned in the flyer, so you can call and get the link. Anyone can come to our membership meetings, and Deborah can speak to that too. But and we're having a speaker from a voter. Deborah, maybe you can, you're the communications person, but any rate, look in the chat if you want to know. You can call us, someone will call you back, or email us on our email there. And so please, yes, you'd be more than welcome to come.
Yes. And if you need the information immediately, put your email in the chat and and I'll make sure you get the links to the meeting on Saturday. Because right now, the technology challenge would be is is a challenge. I'll put it that way. So we could, if you put it your email in the chat, I'll make sure you get it.
Okay, do we have any more questions or comments?
I'll add just one last comment around home repair. It's one of the things that we see with heirs property too and intersecting. So if you're interested in the heirs property topic, and I'd love to learn more, Jennifer, about what the library is doing on that front. A lot of the programs nationally that we're looking to as models, as well as some of the work that we're doing here in Detroit around heirs property, is trying to address some of it through home repair. Because if you're applying for home repair funds and don't have clear title of your home,
Yes.
then you're not eligible to receive those funds. And so, one of the things that we are advocating for through the heirs property work is identifying alternative forms of proof of ownership, as well as how to connect legal resources to home repair programs. And so, there's some great work that Detroit LISC is doing, piloting two programs in aviation sub and in the Live 6 area. But also tied to that again is this concept of how can you have other forms of proof of ownership so folks aren't excluded from accessing those home repair funds or any other resources that would help them in being able to stay in and maintain their home. And so that is an advocacy point and more of a policy point, and something we're going to be diving a little bit more deeply into, but I've been working with the National Consumer Law Center around as well to understand what could be done in our community.
Well, I would be happy to share the information with you. It's buried in the computer. I could not find it in anything like a reasonable time. But we worked with an organization that helped people with estate planning, especially dealing with heirs property issues.
Wonderful.
And I do have that. We have, if are there any more questions or comments? I don't want to step
Yeah.
over anyone,
Well,
but
Ed, can I just say one thing?
certainly.
Excuse me. Never a lack for questions here, but I had said when Ashley came and talked to our small planning group, I was always concerned about poverty, and I was sort of a little bit, I don't know, I thought middle class, do we really have to work on that? But you've convinced me we do. And then it hit me the other day. How are you going to work on poverty unless you help people move from poverty into the middle class? So I now feel like it's a great topic and it's justified under all values that we all have. So, any rate, thank you. I appreciated this because it changed my perspective, and I think we all need to be far more concerned about all the issues you've raised. So, Thank you. I will be, I hope.
All right, I wanted to say that February's program will be Minority Voting Rights under the Constitution, then and now. We'll be welcoming back Professor Werner Burton and Armand Derfner Esquire, who have presented for us before on civil rights and the U.S. Supreme Court. The site, this is the link for registering on Eventbrite. That will be February 10th. On March 10th, we will have Christopher Harkins, a former state budget director for the state of Michigan. He will talk about the process of developing the Michigan budget. And on April 14, we will have a representative of the Michigan Library Association to discuss how the association works with the state's government to support libraries through the state. And many of you may know that the Knapp branch is closed to replace the heating system. Our Zoom programs are continuing online only. We're not doing any in-person events. The Repair Cafe, the art class, and the plant exchange are being held at other branches of DPL. So if you're interested in any of those, you can get in touch with me. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Edward.
you.
Thank you, Ashley.
Yeah, great to have it. Thanks for having us. We appreciate the.
Well, it was useful information.
Thanks for having us.
Thank
Great
you.
to see you all.
Okay, thank you, and good night.
Good night.
Night.
Yep. Good night.